You can honestly even just like turn off your video or audio stuff like for a minute while I set these things up. I'm just gonna put it to like a waiting screen. Okay, Jay, I think we should be pretty much ready to go.
Okay.
All right, people, hello and welcome to the latest the Canada Files news stream, a stream dedicated to the latest and greatest in Canadian foreign policy. So today I'm joined by a few special guests, but the very first one and quite a special one is Jay Watts. Now, Jay, just you've been on the show before, but can you introduce yourself for anyone who might not be aware?
Yeah. Hi, my name is Jay. I am the central organizer for the Communist Party of Canada. I'm also the co-coordinator for the Toronto Association for Peace and Solidarity, which is an anti-imperialist chapter of the Canadian Peace Congress and part of the World Peace Council, which works on issues of solidarity, peace, anti-imperialism in Canada, specifically looking at Canada's awful deeds abroad, of which there are quite a few these days.
Oh yes, oh yes. I'll tell you one of the funniest things, and you'll probably enjoy this story. I remember basically when I was never in the fight back orbit, but I engaged with them somewhat because they were on campus, and I remember basically when I mentioned to one of them the idea of like starting the Canada Files as a foreign policy thing. I think they borderline mocked me for it and were like, "Oh no, what is it going to just be? A bunch of Canada giving aid somewhere else?" Like, I'm not even joking. Like, it's a paraphrase, of course, but that was the essence of it, right? So, well, I'm glad I'm talking to you, not fight back.
I don't follow their foreign policy.
Yep, it's not worth it. Just ignore them. That's my tip I've learned. Anyways, so so a bit more of a relevant movement. Well, not for the best, obviously, but it is what it is. Basically, the New Democratic Party has been up to some things. So before we mention this, I'm going to go and I'm going to quickly modify the sharing screen because I need to have the audio enabled. So give me a quick little second.
Mhm.
And there. Okay, here we go. Randall Garrison. Let's see this. You mentioned wanting to see this.
Because having listened to the Minister of Foreign Affairs the day before and talk about how in this unstable world and with U.S. withdrawing from its responsibilities, Canada wants to play a leadership role in securing the world and making the world more stable. And what Canadian wouldn't agree with that? So then you get the defense review and everything is 10 or 20 years down the road. Well, the challenges we have are right now. And so I'm very disappointed. And as I know it's a surprise for some people, but New Democrats have said we are not putting enough money into the military to give our troops the training, the equipment, and support they need to do the dangerous work that we ask them to do. So you need to do that. Yeah. And on the other hand, the second thing you need to do is you need to increase our aid budget. Right? If we're going to get at the causes of the conflict, then we have to increase our development assistance budget. So we're arguing there should have been an immediate increase this year in the military budget and a corresponding increase in the aid. Naive, because having listened to the Minister of Foreign Affairs the day
I'll just keep repeating, but anyways, to get to the point why I wanted to bring it up, you asked me to come on and talk about the NDP's love of the military, as if, this is in reference to Jagmeet Singh's announcement yesterday, the day before, that he thought the military should come in and take over the vaccination process, as if the issue was really that there was not enough people available to do it and not other things. So there's a lot of, there's a lot of shock that goes on to people. They're like, oh, the NDP said something ridiculous and stupid about how they love the military or this and that. It's like, are you not paying attention? This is from 2017. It's on Power and Politics. This is like a major Canadian, it's major Canadian network. Randall Garrison is he's commenting on the Liberals' proposed military budget increase, and he says basically it's not enough and it's not coming soon enough. So it's not that somehow yesterday Jagmeet Singh made this little gaffe, thinking that the military should have this major role in public health, in a public health rollout for the vaccine or something like that. It's like the NDP is always like this. And just because we see a couple of MPs who, play left on Twitter or something like that, doesn't mean that that's actually what the party does. The party, when it goes out, and Randall Garrison is he's the defense critic. I mean, if you want to talk about their relationship with the military, this is the guy they've tasked with that. He's speaking for the full force of the party. So anyways.
Yeah, for sure. I guess you probably have some good expertise. What's like the party's history with NATO?
So Yves Engler will probably be better at this, and I know he's coming on a little later, but I believe there was one or two policy conventions where the membership had basically determined that they didn't want to be part of NATO. They wanted an independent foreign policy. They wanted to remove themselves from NATO. I think that was overrun a couple of times by the NDP brass right now. So since that time, there have been multiple engagements where the NDP has supported NATO going forward, NATO, unilateral NATO actions, including, and I like Sven Robinson, but including Sven Robinson supported the 1999 bombing of Yugoslavia by NATO and against the UN. To his credit, when he saw what was happening there, that, they bombed the Chinese embassy, they were destroying just basic infrastructure, hitting civilians and stuff, he went to Yugoslavia and recanted and said, no, this was a mistake. But since then, I mean, we probably talked about this. We have talked about this for sure. Jack Layton whipped the vote twice, the NATO bombing of Libya. That place is still smoldering right now. Not a single NDP MP, to my mind, has ever said anything about it, except Nikki Ashton once in an interview with Fightback said she couldn't recall the vote. They don't talk about that. So, and there's another element too here, which is that the NDP often positions itself as part of the peace movement or as connections to the peace movement. Sometimes that's through the organization Ceasefire or through Peggy Mason at the Rideau Institute. Well, Peggy Mason has worked. She's the head of the Rideau Institute. She lives in Ottawa. She's worked with NATO for the past, 15 years or something like that. I pulled up something from, let's see, she was speaking in front of the House of Commons, the Foreign Affairs Committee in 2012. And she keeps on talking about here, like the importance of NATO. We have to support NATO. It's got to be, it's more powerful than the UN security forces. We have to go in here. Let's see. I'm talking as someone who has spent the better part of the last 10 years, this is in 2012, working with NATO. NATO is first and foremost a military organization, although of course it has an important political oversight structure. So the NDP even in its, its associated peace wing, which is not really a peace wing. I think what it's a peace wing maybe in the sense of a Cold War peace, which is like there's no left-wing orientation within their understanding of peace. To them, peacekeeping, that's good, that's fine. To them, aid, that's good, that's fine. There's no class structure of aid. They don't recognize that aid, especially with the Canadian government, is associated with mining corporations, associated with the economic interests that either the Liberals or Conservatives are pursuing abroad at the same time. Peacekeeping, they don't understand. Stephen Lewis can go on and on about peacekeeping in Mali, how important it is. Well, the people of Mali are demanding that they get out, that they understand that what's happening in Mali is peacekeepers are securing that country for Barrick Gold. Haiti, same thing. I mean, there's some NDP MPs can be critical of what's happening in Haiti, but they fundamentally don't look at peace or war or imperialism in any sort of sense that has that in any sort of class sense. Basically, it's a moralistic thing at the best. At best, it's a moralistic thing. And so, maybe you do get someone like Sven who can be critical of NATO, even though he was for the 99 bombing of Yugoslavia. But fundamentally, the institution itself, the NDP as a party, supports NATO. It supports an illegal imperialist organization that goes out and does bad shit to a lot of people on behalf of capital, on behalf of imperialism. And I don't know. It's not like we're on the left here and on the anti-imperial stuff. We're so smart and we know all this stuff. I think they know it. I think they just don't give a shit.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with you on that front. So I've asked you to talk a lot about the NDP. Lay out the Communist Party's position on this, because a lot of people may not actually know, to be honest. So
we want to withdraw. We want to withdraw from NATO. We want to cut military spending drastically, and not just the military spending that the Liberals have pushed in, but like the existing military spending even before that. I mean, that's another thing too, that the Rito Institute, the NDP, even the CCPA, which I really like, they work with a guy named Michael Byers. His big thing is critiquing the Harper government for military spending not being enough. Like, oh, it's gone down to 1% of GDP. This is ridiculous. This is terrible. This is awful. This is not good. Like, yeah, the Communist Party's position is that we shouldn't trust the Canadian ruling class and what they want to do abroad, and they shouldn't. And we've seen that everything that Canada's been involved with militarily, even peacekeeping, the murder of Patrice Lumumba in the Congo, everything that happened in Somalia during the airborne affair, everything that's happening in Haiti right now. I mean, people in Haiti right now want the UN out, and the UN includes like Canadian peacekeepers, so beloved by the NDP.
yeah, for sure. I think basically, I think I actually did chat with James Wilt a little bit not too long ago about his article, but that may even in the future be worth just a whole dedicated stream to that, because like Yvonne Glair's written some great books about that, basically, like especially on like the legacy of someone like Lester B. Pearson. But people don't get it, like even among the left, like, yeah. And the funniest thing is when you basically call this out, or you demand that basically MPs take a stand even against members of their own party, all of a sudden they are the most loyal goody two shoes. I'll relay my experience I had with Matthew Green, where I was talking basically I did an article on basically Randall Garrison and the IHRA. Let me see if I can find it, because it was one that I was honestly pretty surprised. Not surprised, because I knew how much of an anti-Palestinian he was, but at the same time, it was, yeah. So basically, he's a big pusher of the IHRA. And basically, I did a whole article detailing this. And basically, I asked the question to Matthew Green, basically, are you going to say anything about this? Basically, like, what are you going to do? Basically, was my question. And you know what's funny? I was accused of being like yet again, I'm paraphrasing here, but I was accused of being essentially like a rabble rouser. He said I was trying to cause trouble. I tried to just tell him I was doing it in good faith, though basically, yet again, that doesn't really matter. Looking back at it, I should have known better, but I do know better now anyways. But yeah, like that's the kind of response. This was the kind of response you get. Basically, if you really press a lot of these NDP MPs on the issues, and you quickly kind of see that those stances crumble. A
And
quick reminder to be
say this is in contrast to previous NDP MPs in the decades before, like Sven Robinson, like let's say Dan Heap, other people who've taken stands even against their own party. And I'll even say it, like Nikki Ashton, yes, voted twice to bomb Libya. She also put forth the Meng Wanzhou petition. I mean, it's just a petition.
I'll give her credit there. Yeah, for sure.
But there's a reason that it was being pushed by the Hamilton Coalition to stop the war.
Oh, yeah.
I assume they went to Matthew Green first and asked him to do it. Maybe he didn't, or maybe they didn't, or they didn't see it. But it seems weird that it was coming from Hamilton, yet they weren't able to use an ostensible progressive left figure in the NDP to push it. But someone who we all know, anybody who's following the NDP or close to the NDP is on the outs with Jagmeet Singh, is not considered, well, because she had the sin of going to visit her very ill grandmother. So I don't know. I whatever. It's I'm past caring too much. I mean, I bring up the historical examples because I think it's important, but I don't have any hope for the current crop of NDP MPs who are considered to be a sensible leftists. I mean, they're not Sven Robinson, and they never will be. And maybe the party just isn't the space that it used to be when Sven Robinson was there, that would allow an MP like him to do stuff like that. Probably these people depend on, party support in order for them to, Sven Robinson even ran last time. He didn't get elected, yet he's pretty popular in his riding. I think that, to my mind, that indicates there was probably no party support really for him. They don't really want him back. Whereas other people who maybe could be, let's say, coded left, but depended on to shit on somebody and say, oh, you're trying to stir shit up. If you bring up a legitimate critique of Randall Garrison, who's part of the Canada-Israeli parliamentary group, who is actively organizing against Palestinian activists in this country. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. Quick little pause to say thanks to everyone for 100 followers on Twitch. I'm very appreciative of that. It's been growing nice so far. And basically, just a reminder, if you want to access one or two special emotes, you can subscribe there, and under the screen, I definitely do consider doing that if you want to support the streams and some of the journalism that I'm doing. Anyways, getting back to it. One of the kind of the great arbiters, I think, of like basically the NDP kind of, in my opinion, is kind of like the pseudo anti-imperialist left, is kind of like someone like Canadian Dimension, who I've had some interesting engagements in, which I'll get into one at the right time, but it's not right now. So basically, one of the major people basically they first caught my eye when they kind of almost played a bit of footsie around basically Navalny, basically trying to portray him as some right-wing rabble-rouser, but not getting into how extreme he was. But one of the things is I believe you've basically critiqued Leo Panich, right? Because he was something that I wasn't aware, but I think you've tweeted a fair bit about him, right?
Yeah, and I mean, he's passed recently or whatever, so I think there's political stuff within it. But I wouldn't say that Canadian. I think Canadian Dimension, it has an editorial collective which varies.
Yeah, it's a mix. I'll give you fair. It is a mix.
They publish a lot of really good stuff. They publish stuff I disagree with. Fundamentally, I think it's a left social democratic outlet. That's okay. I think it plays a good role. I think in the instance of that publication, it's more likely that I think you hold the author to account for what they say in that publication more than the editorial collective. So as much as I like shit talking, I think Canadian Dimension is a good publication. I'm glad it's around.
Oh yeah, no. I'm not saying like down with Canadian Dimension. Yeah, no, I'm not saying that. I just think they can do better there. Anyways, yeah, I guess I want to bring up the tweet which first caught my eye because we actually hadn't gotten. Now that I think about it, I was surprised we hadn't gotten to it earlier. It was this tweet here, and this caught my eye.
Yep.
Jay, isn't it terrible that we aren't deploying the good old troops to help save the country's health?
Well, I mean, this is, first of all, this is like, there's so much wrong with this. Obviously, Garth Mullins, who's a really good person who does stuff on like drug policy in Vancouver, mentioned this. Like, first of all, like, how would marginalized populations feel about the fucking Canadian Armed Forces, which has had repeated scandals, is I think in the middle right now of a ostensible thoroughgoing inquiry into like connections to like neo-Nazi groups and fascists and ultra right-wing groups. Never mind the like big sexist like implosion of years. People are going to feel safe with these fucking military brats walking around deploying the vaccine. And that's not even the issue. I mean, we know in Toronto, they made a big stink about opening up the Metro Toronto Convention Center to give everybody the vaccines, blah, blah, blah. So people lined up. They had like 500 vaccines. The problem wasn't that there wasn't people there to deploy them. That's not the issue at all. The issue was that they didn't have enough vaccines. And the other issue is that if we need people to deploy them, there's a lot of people out of work. Pay them fucking money. Like there's a lot of people who could be doing this work. If we had the vaccines, we could do that. And you can see, what is this about? It starts out with the Biden administration. This is how the NDP like triangulates themselves, or I don't know whatever, orients themselves, which is that like, oh, we can't really come up with our own. We've got to like have our policy that exists in this little world where it's like acceptable to mainstream and to liberals, but it embarrasses them without making any substantial critique or anything where they have to explain themselves to anybody except the left, which is like, what the fuck is this? So it starts out with the Biden administration. Oh, they're sending the troops in. Why can't Justin Trudeau send the troops in? Obviously, this isn't directed towards people like us. It's not even directed towards people who generally probably donate to the NDP. It's directed towards people that they're making a play all the time. They're making a play to become the new liberals. And no one needs the new liberals. The bourgeoisie of this country don't need the new liberals. But so they come up with this stupid fucking shit. And I'm glad, I mean, keep on doing it. Keep on coming up with this because it's just so obnoxious and just like, wow.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, it's nuts to me. It's like the core thing, and there were a few op-ed or certain like analysis pieces in the kind of files around that time. It's the core logic of we can't just invest in our actual like medical system and basically invest in capacity there. Basically, like we spend so little in terms of health costs and hospitals, basically in this country compared to our actual population levels. It's just, I used to say it's nuts. To me, it's not nuts anymore because I've just realized that it's just not what they care about at the end of the day. But
it's not, this is like a focus group, fucking marketing team idea about like, how can we end up on the fucking 6 o'clock news, the CBC National or whatever, with some idea that people like, and this goes into the thing that they're not interested in challenging anything about the military. So anything that comes up with spending is going to be like, well, we don't spend enough on it. Like maybe we shouldn't go do bad things. We shouldn't torture people, but we should spend more money on the military. I don't know. I think I'm about done with, and I torture myself with this all the time. I'm about done with listening to anybody who's on the left of the NDP because they don't control the party. They have no influence on any policy. The party, in fact, hates them and tries to shut them out. So if you're in the NDP and you think something different, I don't know. I don't care. Does the manager of Foot Locker run Foot Locker? No. The manager of the Foot Locker in your neighborhood manages Foot Locker and still has to take like still has to take orders from above. So I don't give a shit if you're Matthew Green and you say, "Oh, this is really bad." Okay, what are you doing about it? You're not Sven Robinson.
Yeah, and one of the things for me that was interesting to see was basically Matthew Green was basically I saw him mocking a few Communist Party members who were basically in his riding, basically sarcastically calling them comrade and basically asking them what they'd done other than
Yeah, which is fine. Whatever. He's going to keep on
yeah.
doing that. And I think his thing is that, the real value of political engagement is that you run for a major party and you somehow get elected in Hamilton. Like, oh, electing an NDP in Hamilton. Wow, what a crazy thing. I mean, if you got elected in like Jason Kenney's riding in Calgary, that would be an achievement. If you're an NDP in Hamilton, I mean, historically, that's where they get elected. But whatever. I'm sure it's annoying for him to open up his fucking Twitter all the time and have him to answer for a party that maybe by what he says, he doesn't believe in these things, yet he's still in this party. So I'm sure that must be annoying. Everybody pointing out that you say these things, but yet your party says these things. So I don't know, but communists on the internet are not necessarily the nicest people either. I'll say that. So so what does it mean? I don't know. It doesn't who cares? Who cares?
Yeah, no, it's not the biggest thing.
Other things to do. And I think one of the things we have to talk about then is if we're talking about peace and supporting peace and anti-imperialism and stuff like that, is we have to start getting off the internet and just take, I do this all the time, taking pot shots at the NDP, and we're not going to be able to get off the internet really quickly right now. Taking pot shots is fine and fun, but we should start thinking about what are we actually going to do to pressure these things. Labor Against the Arms Trade, I think, is a really good organization that's doing stuff. I mean, these days of action, they've been relatively small or whatever, but they're building up. They're trying to bring in labor, which has the force to speak against for peace, maybe not against imperialism all the time, but they can be more radical than the NDP can at this point. And so maybe that's where we should put our energy, while still shitting on NDP MPs if we need to.
Yeah, no, I think I'm generally in agreement there. I mean, I was a huge fan of their action in the day against the war on Yemen, and there'll be something coming out maybe the next week or so, a special kind of piece looking at that that is going to be kind of the standard of article that'll be coming out. On the Canada Files, I still have forgotten to actually do a formal thread on it, but the Canada Files is pretty much changing from a daily news site to one that's more investigatory and kind of genuine analysis that maybe no one else has seen, is the way I put it, modeling it pretty much off the Gray Zone. Because I was fortunate enough, as a lot of maybe the people who came to the channel recently have been following the channel, I was fortunate enough to talk to Ben Norton, and so I got to chat with him after about some pieces of advice, and so there's some things I'll be implementing there. Anyways, now Jay, there's one of the things that basically there's a really good work is done is Cuba Canada solidarity. So there's basically an event that's going on right now that we're going to transition to watching for a period of time. But before you want to do that, maybe could you talk a little bit about yet again, I know maybe you're not the best expert on it, but could you maybe bring people up to speed a little bit on kind of what efforts have been going on in terms of Canada-Cuba solidarity efforts?
So Canada-Cuba solidarity is it's been there since before the revolution, actually. And then around the time of the revolution, 1959, there was the Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which existed in the States as well. It was a pretty broad grouping of socialists, communists, leftists, sort of progressive liberals, which is a term that has fallen into disuse. I don't think we can say those groups really exist anymore, certainly not in Canada, who's basically supported Cuba. There was a split around 1961. I think it was because of when the socialist character of the Cuban Revolution was declared. that some of the people in the Fair Play for Cuba Committee in Canada didn't want to go with that, thought it was Stalinist, et cetera, et cetera. So the CCFA was started, which communists and other people created, basically. So since then, I mean, there's still, sorry, it's not just communists who are involved in that. There's lots of NDPers, lots of independent socialists. It's still a broad grouping as the Fair Play for Canada Committee was, but I think probably at that time is more oriented towards supporting the socialist nature of Cuba. So the Canadian Network on Cuba is also part of the Canada-Cuba Friendship Association. Broadly, Canada has been, I guess, in a unique position as compared to the United States. Probably most people know that Trudeau had a relationship with Fidel Castro, a friendship, that Canada, even before that, had business interests because of Canadian imperialism, basically in the Caribbean. That Canada made a deal during the Revolution to maintain some banking, to allow expropriation of goods and stuff like that within Cuba, but also to still maintain certain like business and banking relationships or whatever. That was a relationship that was predicated on supporting Canadian capital, but also helped Cuba through many years. So yeah, there's a long-standing friendship, but I think even below, but in a sense above that friendship is the friendship between working class Canadians and Cubans, which has been sort of uninterrupted through those decades, whether, a certain government comes in and pursues a more hostile policy towards Cuba, as for example, the Trudeau-Freeland government has been doing in the past couple of years, or the Mulroney government, or is a little more accepting of Cuba, as the Chrétien government and the previous Trudeau governments were. So I don't know. Obviously, people travel there a lot for vacations and things like that. But I think there's more to it than that. There's a lot of cultural exchanges that the Canadian Network on Cuba and CCFA help with. And unfortunately, because of the situation in Cuba right now, one of the things that we're going back to and that we need to do is material support for Cuba in a way that really hasn't been there since maybe the 90s and the special period when their largest trading partner, the Soviet Union, was overthrown in a counter-revolution. They lost that overnight. So in that instance and in previous instances, Canadians got together, organized, supplies being sent down there, medical supplies, other things like that. That's carried on a low level, but right now, the Cuban GDP, I think last year dropped 11%. It was the largest drop since the special period, which is more significant, but still, I was there recently. There are a lot of lineups. There are a lot of, rationing. The remittance, the ban on remittance that Trump brought in or whatever really hurts people a lot there too, and that's why there was the currency changes. So yeah, we're entering a period right now, I guess, of increased demand for Cuban solidarity, more than just arguing with people on the internet, but actually figuring out how we can get the things they need down there to weather the storm.
All right, for sure. So with that, we're gonna actually jump in and basically watch a bit of it. If you want, just to basically me to pause it, just send me a message in the chat, and I'll go ahead and do that. So
Julio, I believe that's Julio Fonseca, who's one of the representatives of Cubans who live in Canada in the organization.
Nice. All right, let me just get into
You have the mic.
Gracias, Julio. Es un placer como siempre y un gusto.
It looks like they're having some technical issues.
Depois do pesadelo amplificado nos últimos 4 anos por regime delinquente que causou tanto sofrimento, o que tem significado para os Estados Unidos e o resto da comunidade global. Hoje, em meio à devastação causada pela
Okay, technical issue here. I thought they were speaking in English.
Levantamento
All in
da
English.
multifacetada guerra econômica, financeira e comercial contra o povo irmão cubano. São 6 décadas de horror, que apesar dos seus diferentes e perversos refinamentos, não conseguiu dobrar a determinação inabalável.
Plot twist. Let's give me a few seconds while I figure out what to do there. Basically because I was expecting that to be in English. Anyways, yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things basically when you think about basically the Canada-Cuba connection actually is, and yet again, Yvon Glaire basically was the figure who I realized this through. Like part of the reason why we actually kept good relations with basically with Cuba in the first place, right, was actually to help basically Canada spy on Cuba. So that was actually one of the major reasons. So I think it's
I think there's two things going on, and this is how the Liberal Party has always thought of itself in probably the classical statesman sense of like somebody like John Manley, which is that there were existing Canadian commercial interests which could be protected by engagement with Cuba, but also it could be sold to the US as being, it was like to justify the independent activity of the Canadian state. They could say, look, and we'll tell you this shit that's going on there. So I think it wasn't, I think it was probably independently thought of as a stroke of genius by Canadian foreign policy planners in order to justify that to the Americans. The Americans probably said, oh, that's a good idea. Okay, we'll go along with it. By that, I mean that I think that it was actually something that Canadians came up with and sold to the Americans. And so because of that, that's why there's been this small little progressive opportunity for Canadian-Cuban engagement. So I don't think it's entirely just a creation of American imperialism. It's a little more complicated than that. But at the same time, I think we see under Freeland in the new Trudeau government or whatever, that sort of, even that willingness to be there is well, it doesn't matter as much because there's not the non-aligned movement. It's not the 1970s, it's not the 60s anymore. There's these like blocks in the Cold War and that space for us to play. Now there's capitalism in like, world-ending epoch crisis, and probably portions of Canadian business just don't really give a shit that much about, carving out a little niche in Cuba.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough. So what it will do in place of basically watching the stream, because it seems like it's actually not as English-based as I thought it was originally, is there's a great series, Belly of the Beast, actually it's called, Belly of the Beast Cuba. Maybe we'll watch the other episodes later on, but I think I'll pull one of these on to maybe give people a little bit more of maybe an idea of Cuba, and basically maybe give people a little bit of a more kind of fun look through. No, I don't know if I say fun, but an interesting look through on what's going on. So yeah, again, like if you want me to pause, just let me know and we can discuss from there.
Hi, I'm Liz. People come to Havana looking for the real Cuba, and this is what they do. But this is not my Cuba. My Cuba isn't so romantic, but I'm happy here. I love my country. Cuba is safe. We've got free healthcare and education. I graduated from university without paying a penny, and I became a journalist.
Pero lo mejor que tiene Cuba es su gente.
But we've got one huge problem, the economy.
La situación está mala.
Malísima.
Fea. Pésimamente mal.
Está difícil.
Estresante.
Caótica.
En candela.
Ahora mismo está fatal.
A mí ni me pregunto.
During the pandemic, people have to wait in line for hours just to buy food. Aquí la cosa está dura. COVID. I'm used to this. I grew up in crisis.
Y no es embargo ni bloqueo. Es guerra.
The legislation I signed today further tightens that embargo. By maintaining our embargo,
El bloqueo económico persiste.
Cruel e insensato bloqueo que haya existido contra nación.
Our government blames pretty much everything on the US embargo. They call it the blockade. Es que lo queman mucho. We get bored of hearing about the blockade all the time. But it's real. The United States has been waging war against Cuba for 60 years. It's not a war with bullets or bombs, but it touches every aspect of our lives, recently more than ever. ¿Cómo está Ernesto? Buenos días. ¿Está listo para trabajar en el campo hoy?
Sí, cómo no, voy a trabajar ahora. Hay personas que me conocen de 25 años y no saben que me faltan las piernas.
¿Me puede mostrar sus prótesis?
Sí, cómo no. Estas son de aluminio y fibra de plástico. No tienen ni articulación, son rígidas. Y se puede partir por aquí. Y entonces la parte del pie se puede partir también. Una vez por aquí cargando un saco de yuca, se me partió por aquí. Porque a mi hija ya te digo que cuando esto se rompe es un problema.
This is where Ernesto goes to get his prosthetics, free of charge. But Ernesto can't get the specialized prosthetics he needs, because it's illegal for Cuba to buy them. ¿Y existen unas prótesis un poco más resistentes que usted le pudieran servir más?
Existen unas prótesis más resistentes, con más calidad. Caminaría mejor, incluso podía trabajar mucho más, pero no tenemos acceso a ella por el bloqueo.
Ernesto doesn't complain. In Cuba, we've lived with scarcity for so many years, we take it for granted. The blockade is the longest trade embargo in modern history. It isn't motivated by concerns about human rights. It's about money and power. Until 1959, Cuba was like a US colony. Our economy was controlled by US companies, corrupt politicians, and the mafia. After the revolution, Cuba nationalized the US companies. We claim our sovereignty, our right to govern ourselves. The government gave basic rights to the majority: women, black people, campesinos, the working class. The blockade was retaliation. It's basically a form of economic warfare. The blockade stops Cuba from doing business with the United States. They can't buy our stuff and we can't buy theirs. And we can pay for things because banks won't lend us money or even let us open accounts. The blockade also stops Cuba from doing business with other countries. That's not all. The blockade also locks us out of a big part of the internet. We're used to getting bad news from the United States. But 5 years ago, llegaron por primera vez buenas noticias de la Casa Blanca.
Does not serve America's interests or the Cuban people to try to push Cuba towards collapse.
¡Que volamos!
Obama announced new relations with Cuba. He began by loosening the blockade. US airlines and cruise ships started taking tourists to Havana. Business was booming. Clandestina became Cuba's first independent design store in 2015. Idania is Clandestina's co-founder. She started the store after Cuba opened its economy to private business.
Clandestina pretende establecer el trabajo de los jóvenes diseñadores cubanos.
After Idania met Obama, clandestina became a symbol of Cuba's new private sector.
Havana was like overcrowded, celebrities, musicians, politicians, everybody. It was insane. Chanel runway, Fast and the Furious shooting, Rolling Stone concert. The mood was anything is possible, all this sense of change, and finally to be aware of I have a future here. I can stay here, I don't have to leave my country. But then Trump won the election, so.
But all of the concessions that Barack Obama has granted the Castro regime were done through executive order, which means the next president can reverse them, and that I will do.
The Trump administration is imposing new restrictions on U.S. travel to Cuba.
John Bolton making a South Florida stop today to talk to the Cuban-American community.
Unveiling sweeping changes to Cuba policy.
A major blow to the new U.S.-Cuba relationship.
The U.S. has banned flights.
All families to leave Cuba.
The U.S. government will also ban trips by cruise ships.
They'll have to go after their finances.
Limiting the amount of money. Fresh U.S. sanctions.
It's part of a trend.
U.S. tourism stopped. And if you don't have tourism, you don't have business. No tourism, zero remittances, no trade at all. You are suffocating the private sector. You are suffocating the Cuban people.
Since COVID, things have gone from bad to worse.
¿Tiene ibuprofeno por casualidad?
No, mamita, eso está en baja.
¿Y warfarina?
Tampoco.
¿Y metformina?
Tampoco.
¿Y enalapril?
Eso está en baja.
You'd think the US might loosen the embargo during a pandemic. Nope. Recently, 2 Swiss companies refused to sell Cuba ventilators because they were owned by a larger US company. And a US-owned airline wouldn't take a donation of masks and ventilators to Cuba. On top of all that, the Trump administration made it even harder for our family members in the U.S. to send us money.
The Trump administration has killed a deal that would allow Cuban baseball players to play for Major League Baseball.
El bloqueo afecta hasta nuestro deporte nacional.
Cian Vega is one of Cuba's top young baseball prospects.
Desde chiquito siempre mi papá me inculcó entrenar, me llevaba todos los días la pelota. Empecé a ver mi talento a partir de los 13, 14 años. Hay ya bastantes peloteros cubanos en la MLB que se han formado aquí en Cuba. Representar a mi país en el más alto nivel, que es la MLB, sería mi sueño, la verdad. Trump, cuando nos cerró las puertas de firmar con la MLB, casi todos los peloteros se sintieron mal por esa noticia.
Claro, porque ahora, en caso de que tú quisieras jugar con la MLB, tendrías que renunciar.
Tendría que renunciar a mi país, no me gustaría, la verdad. Me gustaría jugar y volver a mi país, vivir con mi familia, no estar lejos de ella.
For his rivals, tonight just might be the last big chance to stop Donald Trump.
It's hard to believe now, but 5 years ago, some Cubans thought a Trump presidency wouldn't be that bad.
Si me tuviera que escoger, yo escogería a Donald Trump.
Y sabe que Cuba tiene un mercado virgen.
Y él le interesaría mucho invertir en Cuba. Entonces no creo que todo ese proceso que ha ocurrido lo eche para atrás.
That same month, Trump's executives were visiting Cuba and playing golf here. It wasn't the first time Trump tried to do business in Cuba.
This is the website for La Oficina Cubana de Propiedad Industrial. It's where foreign companies apply to do business in Cuba.
In 2008, Trump registered his brand name for hotels, casinos, beauty contests, television programs, and golf courses.
I'm okay with the Cuban situation, but I want to tell you they should be making a good deal.
So what or who made Trump change his position on Cuba?
Guys, we have a con artist as the front runner in the Republican Party.
Thank God he has really large ears, the biggest ears I've ever seen.
And you know what they say about men with small hands?
Rubio, total lightweight.
If he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now?
No,
selling watches in Manhattan.
Trump's fight with Rubio didn't last long.
A man that's really become a friend of mine, Senator Marco Rubio. Great guy.
After Trump won, they became allies. Trump let Rubio pick his Latin American team, and Rubio wrote Trump's new Cuba policy.
I have wonderful memories from our visit during the campaign. I was right before the election. I guess it worked, right?
Trump's war in Cuba has won him the support of powerful Cuban American businessmen and politicians like Marco Rubio. They helped him win Florida, the country's biggest swing state, in 2016. And Trump believes this is the way to win again in 2020.
I'm Cuban and support Trump. I am so thrilled to be back here with all of my friends in Little Havana.
When US presidents say they are talking to the Cuban people, they're not talking to us. Because we don't get to vote in Florida.
Pero los cubanos no cogemos lucha con la política de los Estados Unidos. El bloqueo está ahí y punto. Así que para adelante, que no hay más nada.
Anyways, I just thought that'd be fun to watch as a bit of a maybe give people a bit of a base perspective on Cuba. Any just immediate thoughts on the video?
Yes. Firstly, the Obama retrenchment with Cuba was not based on any sort of like, we want to help out the Cuban people, blah, 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 blah. It was like, oh, we've failed after this many years of destroying the Cuban socialist project. Ergo, we need to try something different. And part of that is a sort of soft power thing, which I would say would include the private sector, including a thing like clandestina, which is maybe not them explicitly, I'm not suggesting that, but I was in Cuba in December and walked by their spot in around Plaza San Cristo, which is shut down or whatever. But I think part of the encouragement was there. We've seen that like in the last 5 years since then, basically the US has spent $1 billion going into different organizations, civic sector, civil society kind of stuff to support enterprise. Basically, Obama's largesse in opening the blockade was not at all about helping the Cuban people, but was just simply a different tactic to take Cuba down. And part of that was to encourage sort of like a dissatisfaction within a new breed of, well, to develop a new class, basically, that would be funded by some remittances, funded by USAID, other government programs from the United States, to make them dissatisfied with what was going on and use their economic power in the dual currency system to push for those things. And of course, as of January 1st of this year, they've gotten rid of the dual currency system. So some of those inequities that were inherent in the tourist dual monetary system will be gone. But still, the problems of the blockade remain, and they will remain under Biden. And I assume Biden will just come in with some other, will probably keep some of the more punitive measures that Trump had, loosen certain things, but why they're loosening things will not be to the benefit of Cubans, even though some Cubans do benefit from it, but will be for the purpose of overthrowing the Cuban government.
Yeah, for sure. A fun note, I don't know the name, but Fonz in our chat says that they actually just recently applied to join the Communist Party recently. So who knows? Maybe Fonz will be a member. Who knows? We'll see what happens there. So yeah, glad to see that. I think I can get a cheers to that. Oh, we have a second one. Planetary Conundrum apparently is also applied. So that's nice to see. I like that. I like that very, very much. That's terrific. Yeah, no, I'm definitely glad to see there's more interest in the party. Obviously, I know I've seen some of the tweets basically about working basically overtime about all the new applications, and it's definitely something that really does please me, to be honest. Like, especially like working and doing the kind of stuff in the foreign policy sphere. And if you're serious about foreign policy on the left, you just can't go with social democrat parties, to be honest. And so like that genuine socialist, that genuine option there, the ML option, is like the Communist Party. So I'm glad to see I'm glad to see that's growing. So assume it's gonna be a next busy little period for you.
Yeah, so we have those new member school that we're pushing people through. So we have a couple hundred people who've signed up for that, which is good. Of course, I think the demand when people come into the Communist Party is sometimes it can be a little more, like it's not just a paper membership or just kind of a newsletter kind of thing. So we fully expect that people will go through these schools and they don't have commit to the party at the time. That's fine. That's totally understandable. We're really happy though that at least we'll be able to give people the opportunity to go through some sort of the education and understand. I mean, this is the thing about being on the left is we believe in two things, right? We believe in a collective project of liberation, which centers working people first, and we believe in the ability. And I think those things sometimes, let's say the CCF before the NDP had, whether we agreed with that path to socialism that they had in their mind or not, the front of their organizing, and those are gone now. And people in the NDP want that. Even on the left, the NDP, they're probably not going to be communists either. So we're not going to, a party for everybody. We're a party for communists. But this is the project of the left. The project of the left is to educate ourselves and to work with each other. And the NDP, they will shut down your people's critiques because they say, well, people aren't there yet. The working class isn't there yet. Yeah. These people who make $250,000 are telling, working class people that the working class isn't there yet. I would argue that that's because they've totally given up on the idea of any political education at all. Maybe I could be corrected. I don't think the NDP does any political education whatsoever. I don't think you get any explanation as to why they've picked this certain policy that they're approaching, the historical reasons of these things, what they might go forward. I think it's gone. I think it's been gone for probably 4 decades, probably longer than I've been alive. But I'm very happy to be in a party that does it. That party is not necessarily a broad party for everybody who's a soft socialist onwards or whatever, but I'm glad that we're able to use this pandemic opportunity to do these classes, to at least introduce people to what we're about and how we think of the world. And if they don't want to be in the party, that's cool too, because we need to work with a lot of allies, because not going to be a majority amount of communists in 5 years or even 10 years in this country.
Yeah, for sure. And I don't know if this is something you speak to. I think maybe a lot of people might be curious about this. How did Andre Domise kind of come to the party? Because he's quite the remarkable figure. Do you have any idea there, or?
I can't. I have no special insight to it. I think he has a family background in it. He's obviously always been political and engaged in things that he thinks are important as a public figure and stuff. He was part of Canada Land Commons and that, definitely in progressive element in media. So that is a question for him.
Yeah, hopefully I'll have him on one day. I have so much respect for his work. Really, it's tremendous. Fonz is saying that Andre was his main inspiration to actually join the party. So that's interesting to see. So yeah, hopefully a figure like him just publicly taking that kind of stance might have a positive impact there. So yeah, you know what, Jay, I have, is there anything you might want, because I'm going to be having Yvonne Blair come on in a minute or two. Is there anything you want to plug right now?
No, because anything I plug is going to make me work so much harder. But I'm joking. I would say there's a really great event coming up on the 20th on Saturday. Whenever the 20th is. I think it's Saturday. Is that Saturday? Yes. So it is part of the Pride Commission and Gender Press Commission of the party. They're doing a thing called, which is a People's Recovery and Queer Liberation. So it's looking at the lens of the pandemic and what's happened and what tools from the previous queer liberation movement we can think of to apply in terms of the organizing that we're doing now under these very difficult circumstances. So if people want to go on YouTube and look for CPC updates, that's our YouTube channel. It'll be streaming starting Saturday. And then after that, we're doing an International Women's Day thing on March 7th, which will have representatives from the Cuban Women's Federation, from the Women's Federation in North Korea, many other international guests, doing basically an anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, socialist program on International Women's Day, which will be Sunday, March 7th, I believe. So yeah, just the party YouTube right now, that'll be where a lot of stuff is happening. So that's
sure. I'll take a quick second and actually see if I can drop that link in the comments section. You're saying CBC updates, right?
Yeah, let me hear. I'll give you the link.
Okay, I got it. I got the link.
40 years of
Okay, there we go. And it is now in the Twitch chat. So if people want to go there, sub to the YouTube channel. The party does great work. So does Jay. Thanks a ton. Thanks a ton for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, and say hello to Eve, and have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
All right, catch you in a bit. Yeah. Okay, now we should be having Yves Anglaire on in a minute. Let me just check in to see where he is. Anyways, yeah, I'm curious. Obviously, basically, so Zorbatron. So what is your kind of lean there? Are you more of someone who basically leans still towards like the NDP kind of, or is it you're kind of leaning more towards like, I don't know if it doesn't have to be a communist party, but like left social movements and such? Yeah, let me bring up an important event right now. Basically, there's an event that basically Yves Anglaire is gonna come on and plug in a minute. Basically, okay. Okay, where the hell is he? Okay, give me a quick second. I actually have to make a call because I need to figure out where Eve is. So people just stick around for 30 seconds. I'm going to figure out where Eve is. All right. Well, that was quicker than expected. Hello, Eve. How are you doing?
Not bad. Yourself? Sorry, I didn't have the link and I was just listening to it.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. If there's any issues there on my part. So yeah, anyways, Eve, thanks so much for coming on. Can you give you like a quick little intro about yourself, just in case people don't know who you are?
Yeah, I'm an author of a number of books, 11 books, mostly on Canadian foreign policy. And I've been politically active for about 20 years, number of different issues, probably most significantly in student activism 20 years ago, and then Haiti solidarity activism, and then Palestine solidarity activism, and anti-war movements. And I've written lots of articles, and I'm now a fellow of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute.
Alrighty, so thanks a ton. So basically with the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute now, like what's the upcoming event? Like what's the focus going to be there?
Well, it's titled The Trouble with Aid. I think Reflections on International Development Week. So last week was International Development Week, which is a government-initiated promotion of Canadian aid and Canadian aid in quotation marks work. And the event is actually initiated by one of the other fellows of the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, David Webster, who's a professor. And it's going to be a critical discussion of Canadian aid. And it's an issue that I think is there isn't enough understanding of what really motivates Canadian aid, especially on the left, partly because Canadian aid has been very successful at bringing in, or if you want to use the word, co-opting much of the internationally focused sphere. So, all these NGOs that are reliant on government funding for international work, so much of the perception of what you should do if you're care about inequality in the world is to join a NGO that's building schools in Uganda or something like that, do engage in charity work. So anyways, there's a real lack of critical discussion of Canadian aid, and the event tomorrow night will hopefully delve into some of those issues from a critical lens.
For sure. Let me see if I can get this screen shared right now so I can just show people. So here is the link. Actually, you'll see the link right here. I'll actually throw it in the Twitch chat because I find that's probably one of the best ways to directly do it. So here it is. Definitely, once this stream is done, go over there and go sign up. So for sure. So here's the actual event. Here's the event page. There's a whole bunch of really good speakers there, and yeah, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute's doing some terrific work. So really glad to see that is that's going to be keeping on going. So yeah, so basically now you basically wrote. Actually, no, I want to ask you this, right? So one of the interesting things when I was doing some research for an article, kind of like looking at AFRICOM and Canada's role there, could you maybe take a look at the history of maybe Canada's aid and how it's kind of used to destabilize some governments?
Well, aid has been used for all kinds of different elements. I think the first thing to understand about Canadian aid, the initial point of Canadian aid, and Lester Pearson was very explicit about this after they had the Colombo Plan, which was in 1950. Big conference with delegates from Canada, Britain, I think Australia, the US, and that's where Colombo Plan's Canada's initial aid to the so-called the developing world or the global South. And Pearson's really explicit that the point of aid was to combat, how he framed it was combat communism. Right. And he basically said openly that if there wouldn't have been this sort of communist threat, Canada wouldn't have instigated an aid program. When he said communism, what he really meant was radical decolonization. And basically in 1949, of course, China breaks free from foreign grip, and the nationalists / communists take power. And there's a lot of fear at this point. Still, much of the world is under colonial rule, and there's a lot of fear that India primarily, but South Asia in general, which were obviously former British colonies, that they would pursue a genuinely independent path. They would really break free from British / US influence. And so the point of the Colombo Plan and Canada's initial aid program was to blunt that radical decolonization. And it plays out at all kinds of levels, but a simple level, I think, is supporting elite sectors within Indian society that were kind of, waffling between, are we going to really break free completely of British grip, or are we going to, still stay, close? And what aid does is it provides, incentives to those among sort of generally kind of better off elite sectors of, in this case, Indian society, to keep them close keep them, in the sphere of Canada, Britain, the U.S. So that was really the initial objective. Now, I think what you're referring to in terms of Canadian aid in Africa, Canadian aid in Africa has been used to undermine nationalistic governments in terms of training of militaries. I'm thinking specifically about Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, and Canada had a really important aid military training program that was played a very important role in the ouster of Kwame Nkrumah. And you have the Canadian ambassador or high commissioner boasting about how Canada's military training assistance program with the Ghanaian military, that it kept the Ghanaian military as the most pro-Western institution within Ghanaian society, and ultimately they would oust Kwame Nkrumah, and Canadian trained military people were led that charge, and Canadian military trainers were aware of that. So aid is like, I think the simple, one important way to think of aid is it means nothing, right? It literally means nothing. Sometimes aid, there's examples where Canadian aid has been used to support paramilitaries in the Philippines. Like paramilitaries that are tied into really right-wing oligarchic landowners that were basically terrorizing peasantry. There's example of Canadian aid being explicitly used to justify the imprisonment of the constitutional prime minister in Haiti after the 2004 coup. It was this $100,000 donation to this totally dubious human rights organization to literally concoct a justification for the imprisonment of the constitutional prime minister. There's an example of Canadian aid funding being used to rewrite Colombia's mining code, so foreign mining companies no longer had to pay, I think it was 5% royalties, and it was dropped down to 0.5%. So basically just totally open up Colombia's mining sector to foreign domination and exploitation. There's also many examples of Canadian aid, if you look at the individual projects that actually are, sort of beneficial. I was in Cap-Haïtien, second biggest city in Haiti, and I passed by while the Canadian ambassador was launching the school. And I genuinely believe that the school, if you look at that specific school, there was going to be some kids that were going to get an education, in better conditions, or simply get an education that they wouldn't have gotten because of this Canadian funding of the aid program. So in my reading is that most individual aid initiatives have some social utility. If you broaden the lens and look what's motivating Canadian aid, like that school in Cap-Haïtien, that Canadian funding for that school in Cap-Haïtien cannot be divorced from Canada's overthrow of Haiti's elected government, and they cut off aid to the elected government. This is before 2004. They cut off aid to the elected Aristide government, and then when there was a coup government in place, they pumped a bunch of new aid into the country. So obviously, aid is not being designed to help poor people or to help people get out of impoverishment. It's being used as a political tool to support some faction of Haitian political life that we support, and weaken another faction that we don't like. And in this case, in the case of Haiti, it was very clear that the faction that we didn't like was the faction that was really trying to help poor people out, and the faction that we were supporting was the faction that was basically terrorizing poor people. So the basic point is that aid in and of itself doesn't mean anything. You have to look deeper at what's going on politically, what it's supporting at a big picture level. And so my reading of Canadian aid, and I think that it's not really up for debate, really, historically at least. You can make a debate today, but historically, Canadian aid it's a geopolitical tool. It's a tool to support political forces in the global South that we like. And when I say we, I don't mean you and I mean the people who make the decisions in Ottawa and Washington. And that's the first purpose of Canadian aid. The second purpose of Canadian aid is to advance the interests of Canadian corporations. And there's an endless stream of examples of that. And the third purpose of Canadian aid is to co-opt internationalist-minded Canadians, particularly young people, into aligning with Canadian foreign policy, and you see that mostly with regards to funding NGOs and NGOs sort of bringing people into a charity model of activity versus a political organizing, challenging the imperial forces within Canada kind of model.
Yeah, for sure. Basically, now you were mentioning, I guess one of my questions would be, you talked a little bit about Haiti, and because obviously because Haiti's in the news, basically. How is what is Haitian what is Canada's aid to the repressive Haitian governments in the past few years? What has that been, and what's the extent of that been?
Well, like I said, in the early 2000s, you had the Jean-Bertrand Aristide government and the Pamela Velas government that was won the most conclusive electoral exercise in Haitian history. They won almost all of the positions in the Senate, the mayors, ultimately the presidency, parliament. They won that overwhelmingly. And then immediately there was an effort to destabilize the government because it was one that was a very mild reformist, but a pro-poor social democratic, mild social democratic government. The Canadian government's response and the US, they immediately worked to block international development bank, so the America's arm of the World Bank, loan that had already been agreed to the Haitian government, to the elected government. That was already sort of, the money was already been basically allocated, but hadn't been given. This money worked out to about something around a half of the Haitian government's budget. And it led to, it was very explicitly, Canada supported this. It was a US-led initiative, but Canada supported it. And it was basically to starve a government that most of its funding was offered, from international sources, was to destabilize it, was to just punish it for being too democratic and too popular and too aligned with the interests of the majority of the population. Bilaterally, also, Canada cut its money via the Canadian International Development Agency to the Haitian government, to the point where it was almost nil, very, very little. And then immediately after the elected government was overthrown, you had this guy, Gérard Latortue, who's been living in Florida for 15 years, and they decided he's the new head of state. He's in office about 2 years, and all of a sudden, boom, Canadian aid just explodes. They initiate a big aid program. Now, that's not necessarily saying that most of that money was going to the government, though in this case, in the case of Latortue, in the case of the coup government, actually a fair bit of it was. But so you basically have this dynamic where you're using aid in a very explicitly political way. Now, in the past, well, basically since the coup, but to varying degrees, obviously after the terrible 2010 earthquake in Haiti, there was a higher proportion of the Canadian aid. First of all, it was more aid for a short period, in 2010, 2011, and a higher proportion of that was going to different kind of emergency stuff, and then some actual building of temporary shelters and stuff like that. Though even when you start looking into that, you find an incredible amount of what we said we were giving in aid after the earthquake actually was paid out to Quebec corporations that were producing the temporary shelters, and many of them didn't turn out to be actually very useful. So much of the money ends up coming back to Canada. But the primary thing Canada has taken a charge on in Haiti is building up the police force, right? So building up the repressive apparatus of the Haitian state. That's what Canada has funded throughout, and it's just it has been the lead element, the biggest commitment Canada has taken on. And that Haitian police force has been very repressive to differing degrees. Right after the coup, basically they purged the police force of those who were viewed as too sympathetic to the elected government and not basically ruthless enough. And they brought in a whole bunch of former military. That Aristide had disbanded the Haitian military, which was created by the Americans, which was only ever used to repress a domestic population. So it was very repressive force. And they brought in a whole bunch of former military into the police force. And throughout this whole process, while the police in Haiti are killing huge numbers of people, Canada's funding it, training the police, and has continued until today. And what you have right now is you have this very repressive president who's extending their mandate beyond the constitutional allowance. It's turning into just an explicit dictatorship. It was always very dubious, illegitimate government and repressive, but becoming explicitly a dictatorship. And Canada is the police force that's maintaining Moise's position against the wishes of the vast majority of the population, vast majority of the institutions, vast majority of constitutional experts. That's a force that has been built up by Canada. And, so in the narrow, it's very political, right? You're funding a Haitian police force that's maintaining a dictatorship. That is obviously very political. But even beyond that obvious political dimension, Haiti is a country of incredible inequality. The police force and the security forces have been very repressive historically. Security forces, by definition, basically everywhere in the world, they maintain the status quo. Well, in Haiti, the status quo is an incredibly inegalitarian status quo. And most people who are in jail have never been convicted of anything. That was even the case, unfortunately, under the Aristide government, under the elected governments, at a lower proportion than today. But it was even the case. It's a incredibly unjust so-called justice system. It makes Canada's justice system, which is in and of itself has incredible amount of injustice within it. It makes Canada's system look like this glowing entity of justice. And so just reinforcing the repressive apparatus of the Haitian state in and of itself, even under a sort of nominally democratic government, has all kinds of dubious elements to it. And then when you have this dictatorship in place, it's of course a very politically questionable endeavor.
For sure. I think there's a great quote from Thomas Sankara, basically about aid. And I'll read it out just because I think it's a really great one. Those who come with wheat, millet, corn, or milk, they are not helping us. Those who really want to help us can give us plows, tractors, fertilizer, insecticide, watering cans, drills, and dams. That is how we would define food aid. Now, obviously, it's not just food aid, but that kind of quote about the difference between aid that's just used to maintain colonial power and neo-colonial power, and aid that's meant to genuinely assist and help to build capacity in a country long term, I think really rings true there. So
I agree. I think that this is a really the aid question is very tricky at a ideological level as well. Like I said, I believe that most Canadian aid projects, if you look at them narrowly, they do something that most people would consider socially useful. Build a school, maybe help construct a dam, maybe empower girls. But if you look at a bigger picture, if you look at the geopolitics, right? So for instance, there's something that's called the aid intervention principle, what I've dubbed the aid intervention principle, or more crassly, wherever the US kills, US and Canada kill, Canada provides aid. And that goes back to the Korean War, right? So all of a sudden during the Korean War, we start giving a bunch of aid. The Americans in South Vietnam, significant amount of Canadian aid. More recent years, in Afghanistan, in 2004, 2005, the three biggest recipients of Canadian aid were Afghanistan, Haiti, and Iraq, right? What was the connector between those three countries? The connector was that there were Canadian or US troops in all three of those countries, right? So the aid was used to support US Canadian military occupation. So that's a really important part. That goes to the geopolitics of aid. That's one theme of Canadian aid that you basically find no one talks about, even though it's glaring, it's not up for debate. It's just factual that where Canadian troops and US troops are, you find a significant increase in aid. Now, so there's that part that go, delving into the specifics, but there's also the ideological level, right? And how aid confuses Canadians, and the term aid, and to say, hey, we're giving a bunch of money to the poor and something like International Development Week, which just took place, this idea of Canada helping the world. Well, it's part of what it's doing is just designed to gloss over the imperial character, right? Probably Afghanistan, during the occupation of Afghanistan is one of the clearest examples. Canada put a couple $2 billion into Afghanistan of so-called aid. Most of what that was designed to do, part of what it was designed to do was to support political factions in Afghanistan that we were aligned with, that were doing our bidding or whatever. Part of it was just a way different contractors that got their hand on Canadian companies and whatever, got their hand on some money and whatever. But part of it, an important part of it, was to basically try to convince Canadians that this military occupation was really about like helping girls. We wanted to help girls go to school, and it was really like just pumping a bunch of money of like basically PR for the Canadian military, for Canadian public consumption, to provide this sort of positive perception that was, we're not killing people, we're helping girls go to school kind of thing. So the whole discussion of aid is really complicated at the ideological level, let alone into specifics, but the ideological level, in that how it contributes to Canadians, including progressive Canadians, particularly progressive Canadians, view of Canadian foreign policy. So for instance, in the campaign against Canada's bid for United Nations Security Council seat, we had this campaign to oppose Canada's bid for Security Council seat. There was a public letter that was put out. And at one point there was some pressure put that we should put in this public letter that Canada's aid contribution was at its lowest as proportion of GDP in half a century. I personally was very resistant or reluctant to put that in there, not because I necessarily think that it's better for Canada's aid to be at a lower amount than at a higher amount, but because how that fits into the perception. Basically, it's like the more Canada, right? That's what the whole discussion gets. We should have more Canada. If we just give a higher proportion, we have more Canada in the world. But the reality is we need less Canada in the world, right? That's the unequivocal reality if you take a serious look at Canadian foreign policy. So ideologically, the whole aid discussion is a very difficult one. Because you don't want to contribute to this mythology of more Canada in the world. Now, at an abstract level, any decent human being, of course, supports more aid, right? Within Canada, we have a model of aid, right? We have a transfer program where the wealthier provinces provide transfer payments to the poorer provinces, and it's supposed to equal out over time. Sometimes the province is wealthier, and so there's a transfer. I believe something like that should exist at a global scale, right? That should exist. But it shouldn't be up to the whims of the decision makers in Ottawa and Washington, in the different wealthy countries. There should be a transfer payment type of model via the UN, via no strings attached kind of model. But I'm reluctant at a political level. I'm very reluctant to get into a discussion or to bemoan that Canada's giving less aid today than it did 25 years ago, because it walks into it reinforces an ideology that says that there needs to be more Canada in the world, and sort of implies that Canada's benevolent and whatnot. So it's a complicated discussion. I don't know that tomorrow night's panel is necessarily going to broach all of these points, but I think these are some of the points that progressive-minded people should be delving into when they talk about aid, which is of course a very important part Canadian foreign policy.
All right, for sure there. Eve, now, basically, I know you were saying you probably need to get going around 8:30. So is there anything you'd want to, like, obviously the event that's tomorrow night, but is there anything else you want to plug, like how people can keep in touch with your work?
Yeah, people to check out my work and go to evengler.com. You can sign up to get send out whenever I publish a new article. The thing I would like to plug is regarding Haiti. On Friday, if you're in Montreal, happen to be in Montreal, where there's going to be a rally in front of new Foreign Affairs Minister Marc Garneau's office to call for an end to Canadian support for the dictatorship in Haiti. There's going to be a public letter being released calling for Canada to stop propping up Jovenel Moïse in Haiti. Public letter signed by many prominent individuals that's going to be released on Friday, is going to be delivered to the Foreign Affairs Minister, or to his office at least. Hopefully he's there, but unlikely. And I think that it's really worth being engaged, paying attention to what's going on in Haiti right now. There's massive demonstration on Sunday, as many as 100,000 people against the dictatorship in Port-au-Prince. You have they killed one person at that demo and shot a number of others, and many journalists were injured. You have a very repressive government that Canada's backing, that Canada helped put in place. So it's an issue that I think people should really engage with. The Canadian Foreign Policy Institute is also doing a film screening of Haiti Betrayed, which is a very good film, maybe I think the best film ever done on Canadian foreign policy, at the end of the month, and commemorating the end of Black History Month, as well as the date when Canada helped overthrow the Aristide government in 2004. So I would invite people to try to pay attention to what's going on in Haiti, and specifically what Canada's doing in Haiti right now.
Yeah, for sure. I would definitely recommend that people go check that out. For people who aren't able to see it, I've had some conversations with the filmmaker, and there's a chance another screen may happen afterwards. But if you can watch it, the Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, I would most definitely recommend that. Yeah. So, anyways, in terms of the plugs for self, so basically, definitely please consider following basically my Twitch channel. Tend to do a special stream or two a week on kind of like a mix of international and Canadian news. Basically, I recently had Bay Area and Ali Vargas on. Then I had Ben Norton of the Gray Zone on this Monday to go through the whole entire situation on what the heck's happening in Ecuador. There's more plans there in the future. Obviously, tonight it's the Wednesday night Canadian Foreign Policy stream. And then Sunday night, look forward to Canadian domestic policy as well, 7 to 9 p.m., same time there. And if you want to get some basically access to some of the emotes in the chat, just subscribe to the channel. I think it's a tier 1 sub is what you'd need to access those. There's a couple cool emotes. You don't want to miss out there. And also it's another way of supporting the journalism and the streaming that I do. Anyways, Eve, to the audience, to anyone who's watching this on pretty much any platform, thank you so much for watching this, and hope everyone has a great day. All right, catch you later.